one of the big questions is how will the recent actions in government, cuts to the agency and to the center, imposition of restrictions on agency communications, the government shutdown that we're going through today, how will that affect CDRH's performance over time? And I think that a large part of that answer is watchful waiting.
Hello. Welcome to FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. We're the only independent, nonpartisan forum dedicated to discussing the latest issues involving FDA. And I want to remind you, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, you can do so today. Go to fdawatch.net. That's fdawatch.net. You'll get an email whenever a new episode appears and quick access to our headlines and resource links. So please do subscribe. It keeps you in touch with what we're doing on the podcast. Today we're going to be talking about medical devices. We have two great guests, but before I introduce them, I want to do some headlines. Lots of headlines, lots of stuff happening at FDA. In the pharma world, I just want to, there's been a lot happening in the pharma world. I just want to focus on one. Some biotech leaders have come out and said that FDA uncertainty is threatening drug development. There was a story in Stat about it based on a summit that they had there in Boston. Executives from two companies, Replimune and Capricor Therapeutics, spoke about what they said was an instability at the agency. I'm going to quote the Replimune CEO. He said, "It's going to kill drug development if you don't have consistency and transparency. It's really going to make it very difficult for us to bring innovative treatments to patients faster." The Capricor CEO, whose name is Linda Marbin, said that FDA's rejection of an application was a shock because we really didn't feel that rejection reflected the ethos of which the application was filed and by which the FDA had originally suggested the file. This is an interesting story because Replimune had a drug before the FDA, a BLA, to treat advanced melanoma, and they received a complete response letter just a few weeks ago. They then went back, they announced all this, they then went back, had a meeting with the agency, and very recently announced that the FDA now has accepted the resubmission of the BLA. There's a PDUFA date that was set by the agency, April 10th. It's a Class 2 resubmission, and we'll just have to see how that evolves. But it's an interesting episode where they got a CRL, a complete response letter, basically saying you've got to do an additional study, had a meeting with the agency, and now within a matter of weeks, the agency has accepted the BLA. Want to mention one other thing on the pharma desk, and that is FDA has designated 9 products for its new National Priority Voucher program. The list is available not only on FDA's site, but it'll be on our own link, fdawatch.net. So take a look. We have discussed many, many times on this podcast the voucher program, very important development, and we'll see how that works. From the device desk, in mid-October, there was a safety communication. FDA alerted healthcare providers and patients and caregivers to serious complications related to radiofrequency microneedling devices that are used for aesthetic dermatology procedures. There was a story that appeared in Dermatology Times, and it said that these devices, which are Class 2 medical devices, have been reported as causing thermal burns, scarring, subcutaneous fat loss, and disfigurement. The agency is currently working with manufacturers on this issue, and will continue to monitor that. These products are also widely advertised as available for home skincare use, and the agency and experts generally tend to advise against that, so this is an evolving situation. From the food desk, lots of food recalls. I don't know statistically, we'll have to see year-end figures, but it seems to me as if there have been an awful lot of food recalls. This one involves cinnamon and eggs. In early October, the agency updated its list of spice brands to include 16 as having concerning amounts of lead. FDA asked 15 of the 16 manufacturers to voluntarily recall the products. As of October 16th, only 10 pulled their cinnamon products from shelves. On the egg front, one company in Arkansas voluntarily recalled eggs in September due to the risk of salmonella. That was a class 1 recall, which is the highest classification. And we'll continue to monitor this because I think that the issue of food recalls is becoming more prominent. Again, I don't have the numbers, but I do think that there have been more food recalls this year. The agency has been announcing them as it traditionally does, but listeria and salmonella seem to be issues involved with our food supply. And then finally, from the cosmetics desk, there was a recent article in Personal Care Insights, which spotlights a growing wave in cosmetics, the use of human-derived ingredients. Regulators and dermatologists have warned about this craze, but it's very real, and there is concern that FDA has done. There's a concern that FDA has done very little regulation over some of these products. Again, this is something that we're going to be watching. It's human-derived ingredients in cosmetics. Let's meet our guests now. First up is Sandy Coulter. Sandy and I have known each other for many decades. We served together on the strategic advisory group for iTolerance, which is a company in Miami that's developing treatments for type 1 diabetes. I do want to point out that Sandy just did a wonderful video, about 20 minutes long, where she relates her son's experience with type 1 diabetes. Her son is doing extremely well now, is all grown up, but it's a wonderful story. Go to the iTolerance website. It's iTolerance, that's a small I, capital T, tolerance.com, and you can see Sandy's really very, very moving video. Just in introducing Sandy further, she was the regulatory attorney at Medtronic, and before that, she was at 2 global law firms and represented pharma clients and medical device clients. So, Sandy, welcome to FDA Watch.
Thank you so much, Wayne. It's a true pleasure to be here and to be working with you again in the industry. So thank you.
Also joining us today is Steve Silverman. He's president of the Silverman Group, which is a consultancy which works on regulatory issues. He has a long background in FDA-related issues. He was vice president at AdvaMed. He was a senior expert with McKinsey. But most importantly, he served as director of CDRH's Office of Compliance, and before that was an associate chief counsel of the agency. So welcome to FDA Watch, Steve.
Thank you very much, Wayne. It's a pleasure to be here. Like you, I've known Sandy for decades, and it's really excellent to be here with her on this podcast. And you are someone who I have known of for decades, and I think this is the first time that we've had a chance to officially work together. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you very, very much. I want to start out with a question to you, Steve, and that is about CDRH.
Sure.
Your old home territory. Obviously, the center's been affected over the last year, but I just want to ask you to comment generally on what you see happening there. Just a general question. I want to ask Steve, you start out since you worked there for so many years, head of compliance at the center, and then turn to you, Sandy. So, Steve?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that topic, Wayne. It's very interesting because on the one hand, the center has been affected, like other parts of the agency and like other parts of the government, by some of the policies and personnel cuts that have widely impacted federal agencies. Just to give a couple of examples, staffing cuts have occurred within CDRH as they have through FDA, and the center is dealing with that. Also, the center is subject to a rule that I suspect we will talk about in this podcast that says that anytime an agency, including FDA, wants to publish new guidance, they first have to retire 10 previously existing guidance documents. And so all of these formal government actions affect the center. By the same token, there's no question that the center has been less affected than some other parts of FDA. There is no question that the agency is less affected and less adversely affected than, for example, the Biologics Center. There was no push to relieve senior leadership from the Device Center, which fosters continuity and greater comfort among staff. My perception is that the center is very, very focused on its fundamental device review activities, meeting user fee requirements associated with looking at applications for market entry. I question how much capacity the center has to do activities beyond that core focus. But I'm going to just end my comment there. We can talk about it further during the podcast, and I'm really interested in what Sandy's views are.
Sandy, let me ask you the same question. What do you see going on at CDRH?
Well, I would agree with Steve that the Device Center has been arguably less affected than some of the other centers from the FDA turbulence. Certainly, as Steve alluded to, the head of the Device Center, Dr. Michelle Tarver, who was put in place last October of 24, is the only one amongst the centers that have remained in place. And certainly her prior 15 years at the agency has provided the CDRH a fair amount of stability. Having said that, there have been departures, there have been voluntary departures, there have been reductions in force. The two largest offices impacted was the Office of Management and the Office of Communication, Information, Disclosure, Training, and Education. The Office of Management is the one that there was about 80 people. They were completely eliminated. And it's in charge of financial management, budget formulation, and execution, human resources, and other activities. And they also process and do for user fees. The OSITE, or Office of Communication, they oversee external and internal comms. And so if you take a look at your website pages on FDA right now, a lot of them haven't been updated since last January. And so that is a direct result of what we're seeing in terms of these eliminations of offices. The other thing that there have been a lot of questions about is whether there's going to be anybody to manage CDRH's learning management system, which tracks internal training. And certainly, while they didn't get rid of the head of CDRH, there's a number of key longtime leaders at CDRH that have departed as a result of either retirement or being forced out. And that includes the director, Sean Boyd, in the Office of Regulatory Programs, Deputy Director Barbara Zimmerman, who'd been with the center for 20 years, Deputy Director Mike Ryan, and other Roy Tasbaz, Director of the Digital Health Center of Excellence, and Dr. Rusty Segan, Director of the Office of Product Evaluations and Quality.
Yeah, if I can, Wayne, I just want to drill a little bit deeper on one point that Sandy made that I think is extremely important, which is that the Office of Management has basically been eliminated, and many of those individuals are the same individuals who are responsible for facilitating user fee execution and collection. So we are going into this extremely, extremely important and delicate time where the agency is responsible for negotiating the next round, MEDUFA 6, of user fee negotiations with industry. And historically, the agency has had administrative personnel in place who work in the background to stand up and facilitate the agreements that are negotiated. In fact, they are heavily involved in negotiating those agreements. And with the elimination of many of those people, it's an open question of how well situated the center is to go into this next round of user fee negotiations and whether it can do so with the same success and collaboration with industry that it has in the past. In the last round of MDUFA negotiations, MDUFA 5, CDRH was taken to task by Congress for not meeting deadlines for submitting user fee agreements, and that was with a fully functioning staff. Whether the agency is able, I should say, whether the center is able to meet congressionally mandated deadlines as we head into this next round of user fee negotiations is, I think, an open and very important question.
Right. No, I agree with that. And, having been associated, as we all are, with FDA for such a long time, I always have confidence that with any challenge, the FDA people will arise and will do the right thing and will get the job done. That has historically been what FDA does. They've been through not such severe cuts as we see now, but always challenges, and the staff always does what is necessary to get through it. So that's what we're hoping will happen now, but we are entering a delicate period with the user fees. Sandy, I want to come back to one other point that you made, and that has to do with communications. It is true, if you go to the FDA website, a lot of the CDRH, a lot of information on all the individual center websites is not up to date. How do you keep in touch? If you worked in industry for a long time, you haven't been facing the challenge where FDA's own website has been out of date. But given the present environment, how would you advise a company to try to keep in touch with what FDA is doing and to be able to understand, what previously was? I'm going to find. I'm going to start that again. But no. Let me start that again. How would you? Let me start that whole sentence again because I got lost in it. How would you advise companies and company officials as to how to keep in touch with the agency, how to have the latest information that is needed in order for the industry and for consumers to do their job in a regulatory environment?
It's a really important question, Wayne, and one that I addressed a lot inside the walls of Medtronic over the course of my 20 years. For small and large companies, number one, FDA watch. Here we are. We're talking about current issues. There are a lot of free services out there that people can avail themselves of. A lot of law firms and consultancies provide regular updates on regulations and policies. They host webinars and programs, many of which are free. Our trade associations, AdvaMed, MDMA, Medical Device Manufacturers Association, as well as the Food and Drug Law Institute, they all host programs on current topics. I follow those agendas. I see what are those highlights. And if there's something that I haven't heard about, I look it up. A few quick internet searches can provide a lot of this information. It's a very different world out there with the internet and with AI. While you have to validate AI, you can gain valuable information and then validate it in terms of what's going on. Connecting with knowledgeable professionals through LinkedIn can also provide really great info. Because many LinkedIn industry members in our field post their summaries and updates in their feeds, to wit, Steve Silverman, who's here on the podcast. And the only other thing I would say is keep in touch with the agency. Companies can have historically can have periodic updates where you share your information and you get valuable information from them. So don't be bashful about picking up the phone and engaging. I suspect we'll talk a little bit about, engagement with the agency currently under this environment, but there are a lot of ways to keep up to date.
Yeah, I want to come back to the resource question. Uh, as you know, I was one of the founders of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA, which has been lobbying for or advocating. I'll use the word advocating instead of lobbying. Advocating for adequate FDA budgets for a long time now. The budget seems to be lower than it has been in the past. Steve, let me start with you. Uh, Given the fact that there are constraints on the budget, how do you see that affecting CDRH?
I've given the question a lot of thought, Wayne, and I would chunk my response into two pieces. So the first chunk is take a look at what the center is doing right now, today, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I really think that there has been a lot of dedication and hard work, which you alluded to in terms of your discussions of agencies' performance historically, to meeting user fee commitments, right? So, what is life like inside the device center? My suspicion is that there are a lot of conversations about how, given the constrictions that have affected the center, it will continue to timely review and make decisions on device submissions, along with the other work that the agency center, I should say, committed to in the last round of user fee negotiations, right? So some of the answer to your question is based on information that is knowable now. I'll mention briefly that I have some real concerns about the center's ability to do the kind of far reaching and critical initiatives that it has been crucial to historically and that are crucial to its work. So, for example, leadership and engagement on digital technology issues, leadership on application of real world evidence. Whether or not the center is situated to do that work, I think is very much an open question. And I think that that's a decent segue to the second point, which is, and this is the second chunk, what does the future hold? And these are kind of known unknowns. One of the big questions is how will the recent actions in government, cuts to the agency and to the center, imposition of restrictions on agency communications, the government shutdown that we're going through today, how will that affect CDRH's performance over time? And I think that a large part of that answer is watchful waiting.
Sandy, I wanted to shift gears and talk about innovation. You worked at Medtronic for 14 years. Medtronic is known as an innovative company. The number of de novo approvals has been down. There have been staffing cuts across CDRH, as we've talked about. Talk a little bit about how what's going on at FDA affects innovation within the industry, because obviously to have innovation in the medical device field, you need a collaboration between the regulators and the industry and academia and all of the elements.
Thanks for that question. I will tell you that I know that de novo approvals are significantly down this year. I don't necessarily think that means the pace of innovation has slowed. I think there are a number of factors that can affect that. I do think the number of reductions in force, the eliminations at the agency, and even in the device center, there are, as Steve pointed out, in the area of digital innovation, the loss of the head of that, of the director. I think it creates an atmosphere of uncertainty, and certainly in the medical device financing landscape, I'm seeing some of that now, and I think that when there are these layoffs and there are new regulations like tariffs and a less predictable regulatory environment, it becomes everybody becomes a little more risk averse. And so I think that kind of environment affects all, but it disproportionately affects smaller companies, which have fewer resources to sort of withstand delays. And so that could conceivably stifle innovation. Having said that, I think the agency is also moving, and I know that Commissioner Makari is talking about regulatory efficiencies. They're using innovation tools, operational innovation tools like, generative AI internally to try to speed up reviews and get things out there sooner. There's an emphasis on that, and they've rolled it out as of June across the agency. I think time will tell. I mean, maybe we'll see some real forward steps on that front. But I also think for the financing piece and the regulatory uncertainty piece, I think one option that a number of companies will look toward is investment in overseas markets, because it's, and places where maybe there's not regulatory uncertainty and there's not as much regulatory obstacles.
So I want to, if I can, I want to jump in actually, and I want to direct a thought to both of you because I respect your experience and perspectives, right? I totally agree with the points that Sandy is making about what could happen at FDA with respect to some of the challenges that we've been discussing. And the question that pops into my mind is, okay, what do we do about it? And by we, in this instance, I'm really thinking of industry, of medtech companies. And I just want to see if this point lands with you both, which is to say, I think that under the circumstances, there's an even greater onus on industry to chart a course that FDA can follow. So if there is a new technology or regulatory changes that need to occur at FDA, at CDRH to permit progress, whereas historically, there might have been some outside pressure on CDRH to create the space for those regulatory improvements, but most of the work would be done by CDRH based on its own decision making. I think there might be more running space now for industry, whether it's individual firms or trade associations, to come together and say, hey, look, we know that there's an opportunity here. We know that to leverage the opportunity, an infrastructure needs to be constructed. We understand that FDA is the final arbiter, but we have the ability to create a model and to bring it to FDA that may position the agency to implement this model more quickly than it would if we left it to the agency on its own, and that allows us to shape the model in a way that is more realistic and more likely to succeed. So my question to both of you is, does that point land, or is that just wishful thinking?
What I'm thinking about as you're talking is the old phrase, you turn chaos into opportunity.
Right.
And, that's basically what you were saying. And that I'm not, I don't know whether chaos is the right word, because I don't think CDRH is in a chaotic situation. They're doing their work, and products are being approved, and 510Ks are moving along, and compliance is moving along. But certainly there are more opportunities for sure in this environment. I'm not going to compare it to the previous environment, but there are a lot of opportunities. Sandy, let me give you the last word on that, and then we're going to take a break.
Yeah, and it does land well for me. I mean, I'm hopeful, because what I get concerned about is the level of engagement, and will that stay a really good level of engagement between industry and FDA, and it won't be seen as something, toxic or evil, but that it will be seen as a step forward, that we're better together than apart. And one memory that I have is from the 90s, when FDA didn't have the manpower they were trying to get all these reclassifications in place. It's an arcane area of medical device law, and I happen to have done a lot of reclassifications of medical devices from class 3 to class 2. And they really relied on industry to come up with the first draft of special controls. And so we worked together. And I remember, back in the day, Art Sirkowski at the agency and I put on a conference together and taught folks how to do it. And then we also provided the agency with, hey, here's the first draft of special controls to reclassify this device. Mark it up, do with it what you will, and call it back. That's a very specific example, but I do think that those types of partnerships can work.
And Jeff Shuren, when he was center director, of course, advocated very much for that. So maybe one of the takeaways from this podcast is we are in an era of opportunity, and there's lots of opportunities to advance a lot of new ideas. AI, of course, being at the top of the list. We're going to take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back with Sandy Coulter and Steve Silverman talking about medical devices. Sandy, you have been in the private sector for your career. And I want to ask you, you mentioned before about investments. What do you see going on in the medical device investment area these days, given the changes that are taking place at the agency?
On the one hand, Wayne, I certainly see, there's the whole aspect of activist investors out there. And certainly with large companies, we are seeing in certain parts of the medical device industry, activist investors buying enough shares, getting board seats in these large companies, and being able to influence kind of the nature of investments, tailoring investments, and trying to figure out how to get more value out of these larger medical device concerns. And so that is outside of the FDA purview. But I also think that what's going on at FDA and the regulatory uncertainty affects that because everybody's watching. And they're watching the stock market for those publicly held companies and watching how companies are investing. A lot of larger companies are building through tuck-in acquisitions. That means acquisitions that are related to existing businesses they have. For smaller companies, I will tell you, it is a really tough market. And the regulatory uncertainty at FDA really impacts the ability to invest, the ability to get money. And so that's where it concerns me, because I've watched in my career how, at Medtronic, we bought smaller companies that were doing really innovative things. And so we want these small companies to succeed. We want folks to invest in them. So I'm hoping that the dust settles and that people get more comfortable with where the FDA is landing. And I also think that the FDA is trying to be more priority, risk-based driven in terms of what are the biggest issues that they need to focus on. Certainly their 26 guidance agenda reflects some very clear priorities, and it's a shorter list than they've had in prior guidance agendas. So that was a kind of a around-the-block answer to small companies, large companies, and how I think the situation at FDA is affecting it.
Yeah, Steve, I don't know whether you follow the investment area, but welcome your comments as well.
I do follow the investment area somewhat, and I think that it's very interesting to hear Sandy's views. I think that she makes a lot of very good points that I suspect are a reflection of her experience helping to lead, I believe, the largest medical device manufacturer in the world. At the same time, I just happened to be listening to another podcast this morning that brought together a number of outside investors in medical devices. These are VC type investors. And I thought what was interesting from their insights were that many of the fundamentals haven't changed. And those fundamentals, I think, are especially germane to smaller companies. So again, in periods of disruption like we are living in, the onus is on the companies to make the case to potential investors what their products do. Where there is a need for the product, there is actually demand in the marketplace for the device. It's more than just a simply good idea. The product can, after it comes to market, be built and sold successfully. That is an extremely important element. And the company can get paid, and whoever is buying the product can get paid. So reimbursement continues to be a critical element. And I would just add those points to Sandy's good points that I believe are maybe a little bit more tactical, but relevant to smaller device firms and investors.
Great. I want to shift gears a minute and go to what I call a nitty-gritty question. In terms of the day-to-day interactions with the agency, I know, Sandy, you're retired and are not doing that on behalf of Medtronic, but you did it for such a long time, not only for Medtronic, but on behalf of your law firm clients. And Steve, of course, you've been on both sides. How does the present environment change the way that companies, that consultants, that others should interact with the agency, given the fact that there is less information on the website, and there are clearly many changes in personnel going on at CDRH and throughout the agency. Steve, let me start with you, and then turn to Sandy.
Sure, and I'll play against type and try to be succinct. And the jury is out in terms of whether or not I can actually do it. Wayne, I think, as I have said in my past comments, and apologies, I don't want to be redundant, it just puts the onus on companies to define interactions. So the first question, I believe, for companies is, do we need to go to FDA? And if reasonable answers are available through other resources like the ones that Sandy spoke of, resources that are just available online or elsewhere, and that forecloses the need to communicate, that can be exactly the right way to go. Then, if communication is necessary, can the company successfully, in a sophisticated and nuanced way, define what is the issue about which they are trying to seek information? What is their own view of what the answer is? What is the right entry point for getting confirmation of their view or guidance about how they need to modify their view? And what does the company need to be prepared to do over time by way of follow-up, communicating with the agency or not communicating, simply taking feedback and acting on it? I'll stop there.
Okay, Sandy, same question.
So again, I retired in January of this year, but I am getting back engaged. But from what I've heard from colleagues, some day-to-day interactions have changed, particularly if you have a new reviewer. Whenever you have a new reviewer, you have to start all over again, getting them up to speed. Staffing cuts, I'm not sure. They may have affected the agency's ability to have actual meetings and perhaps more written responses for pre-submission questions. The FDA says it's protecting review staff, but I want to hear more out there about the overall interaction and support available to companies. I will say that one of the real jewels in FDA's regulatory framework, and one that doesn't necessarily exist in other parts of the world, is the FDA's pre-submission and early engagement capabilities, the ability to discuss breakthrough designations, the total product lifecycle advisory program, open communication with the agencies where everybody can brainstorm how to manage certain approval processes. This dynamic of open communication is extremely helpful to the public that FDA serves and has set FDA apart. And I know that, our trade organizations and nonprofits have helped to foster this communication. And I sincerely hope, it's not a direct answer to your question, Wayne, but my hope is that that open engagement, which is the hallmark of FDA and industry interaction in the past, particularly 10 to 15 years, will continue.
Just to add one point emphatically to Sandy's, the type of interaction that she's describing is not and never has been evidence of agency capture by industry. And the argument that this type of interaction signifies that industry somehow is calling the tune and FDA is dancing is, in my opinion, uninformed, amateurish, and counterproductive. These are complex issues. And when people get together to work through complex issues, it takes getting a lot of smart and dedicated people in the room. And that means people inside the agency and outside the agency. I saw it when I was at FDA, and I've seen it since leaving the agency.
It's a really good point, Steve. And certainly I saw throughout, particularly in the last 10 years, a lot of the media trying to paint that the industry, in cahoots with the agency and affecting policy and affecting agency decision making. Not that it doesn't occur on the fringe, but I think that it's important. This dialogue is so critical to good public policy decision making. And so I hope that the neutral conveners out there that have the ability to bring FDA, bring industry, bring academicians together continues in a very profound way so that we make better decisions.
Right. Let me just make one final comment on that. And that is, I don't think that anybody who really knows anything about FDA would think that the agency, to use your phrasing, Sandy, is in cahoots with the industry or with anybody. The people at FDA are the most dedicated federal employees, and they could be doing a lot of other things
Right.
besides working at FDA. Given the environment that we're seeing now with the shutdown affecting everybody, I think what you said is certainly I'm going to say a truism.
And a shout out to FDA during this shutdown, because I know a lot, about 86% are still working in difficult conditions, and it's not easy. And I'm certainly appreciative of the work that they're doing.
I'm going to turn to our resource link segment, providing you with some valuable links you might want to check out. If you go to the website, fdawatch.net, you can find all of these resources. There's no need to write anything down, but please do check out fdawatch.net. And I remind you again, if you have not signed up to receive all of our podcast notices, please do so. Go to fdawatch.net. On our Pharma resource link, all but 2 Republican senators have signed a letter to HHS and FDA, which urges the agency to suspend approval of a new generic version of the abortion pill mifepristone. The drug was approved 25 years ago. Obviously, abortion is a big issue. It's been a big political issue, in addition to being a medical issue for many, many decades. The senator's letter said that the regulation that FDA instituted in 2023, which permitted mifepristone to be dispensed through the mail, should be abandoned. It's a big threat to unborn life in America today, they said. This is something that we're going to continue to track, and our resource link goes to the letter that these senators signed. In the medical devices area, FDA's Digital Health Advisory Committee will meet November 6th for a virtual session on AI-powered digital mental health tools. According to the agency, the discussion will explore how these technologies can safely support diagnoses, treatment, and behavioral health while guarding against algorithmic biases and patient data risks. It's part of an FDA push to understand how rapidly evolving AI fits within the existing regulatory framework. So the meeting will be held virtually. The agency will make a webcast link available. We don't have that link, but we will include that link when it is posted. And our current link links to the press release announcing the meeting. So if you want to tune in, that's important. We're going to have an upcoming session of the podcast on digital health products. In the food area, the Environmental Working Group has an interactive map that allows users to check in on the progress of state-level food chemical-related bills across the country. According to the map, nearly 30 states have a total of 50 active bills in their state houses. That's just an example of the high-level information the map provides. Again, you can go to our resource link, fdawatch.net, and pick up how to access that state-level information. Finally, from the cosmetics desk, according to an article in Cosmetics Design USA, there's an EU crackdown on intentionally added microplastics. There are deadlines for products that say rinse off and leave on in 2027 and 2029. Brands in North America aren't directly bound by the rule, but companies that export to Europe or work with a global supply chain are already feeling the squeeze. That's what the article says, and many products are going to have to be reformulated. The real challenge is how do you replace microplastic ingredients without losing performance. We frequently on the podcast check in with what the EU is doing because obviously that ocean is getting smaller and smaller, and regulatory events that occur on one side of the ocean affect on the other side of the ocean. Again, this link and all these links are available at fdawatch.net. On that note, I want to thank Sandy and Steve for being such great guests. I also want to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I want to remind you that if you want to suggest or be a guest on our show or want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor, you can contact us, info@fdawatch.net. That's info@fdawatch.net. And again, check out our website. Again, I repeat it throughout this podcast, fdawatch.net. And again, if you haven't subscribed, do so. And if you're so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast, it really does make a difference. So as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to our podcast, FDA Watch.